the motion. The Honourable Mark Latham.
Thank you, Mr President. I move, according to notice, that the following matter of public importance be discussed forthwith: New South Wales's participation in the Murray Darling Basin Plan. And Mr President, the top priority of this parliament should be to look after country New South Wales, which has been hit by a cruel double whammy. The long lingering impact of the drought, now made worse by fire. And I think it's important for the parliament, not only in wishing everyone in the bush all the best in these difficult circumstances, but to take decisive action. And thankfully last night, country New South Wales had good news with the passage of the Right to Farm Bill, for which the Minister, the government and large parts of the crossbench should be congratulated. But I think we can go a step further, and that's to support the Deputy Premier, the Leader of the National Party, in his determination to improve water policy in New South Wales by getting rid of this wretched basin plan. And John Barilaro last week in fact said, and I quote, "If we can't see a change in how the Murray-Darling Basin plan is working for the people of New South Wales, forget pausing the plan, rip the bloody thing up and we will walk away. The reality here is water is running out." And I've got to say, you've got to love Barra, haven't you? He's the Arnie Jack of the New South Wales Parliament. Rip their bloody arms off. In this case, rip up the Murray-Darling Basin plan, because it's working decisively against the interests of New South Wales, against the interests of irrigators, farmers and the rural economy. And why is that happening? Well, I think it's pretty clear this plan has failed because it was heavily politicised in the first place. It was developed in 2012 mainly for political reasons, to push as much water down to South Australia as possible. Now, Adelaide's been running this fake argument they're running out of drinking water. That's never been sustained. But the major parties in Canberra collaborated in 2012 to essentially say they're worried about the rise of Xenophon, they're worried about the marginal seats in South Australia, and the enormous amount of water that's been pushed down to the mouth of the Murray and wasted, flushed out to the ocean when it could have been used in New South Wales, is reprehensible. Now, at one level, Xenophon was a bit of a joke, dressing up in milk bottles and tampons and running around the Rundle Mall there in Adelaide, but he did pose a significant threat to the major parties who were worried this was an emerging third force in South Australia. And the plan has always been designed around the politics of South Australia much more than the needs of New South Wales. Now, one of the surprising aspects is that in the determination to get so much water down to the mouth of the Murray, it's flooded the plain at the Barmer Choke on the Murray, just east of Moama. And it's amazing that the environmentalists who say they've got a concern about the natural environment and effective water use have not raised a single complaint about the extraordinary situation where the Murray narrows naturally and you can't get all that water pushed through to Adelaide. It's spread and destroyed the Barmer forest. And I drove through it, or past it, just south of the river during the election campaign in February, and you had to stop and have a good look at it. It's quite extraordinary that in a time of drought, so much water could be wasted to kill off an entire forest for the simple natural reason that there's a choke in the river, but we're trying to get so much water down to Adelaide under this plan, it's wasted. Water that could have been used in New South Wales by farmers and rural economies, and the environmental devastation is extraordinary. So where are the Greens and the environmental movement making the sensible point that you could push too much water down to South Australia and damage a large part of the Murray environment? They haven't made that point, but it's a decisive signal of how the plan has failed. The other failure in the plan, of course, is to look at the water allocations. That New South Wales, in this terrible drought, has got zero water allocation for irrigators in the south of the state. In South Australia, it's 100%. How does that work out? How can we be in severe drought? South Australia, not so much. They've got 100% water allocation. We've got zero. And the other problem that I'd highlight in the plan, Mr President, the third problem, it's not just political, it's not just the absurdity of the Barmer Choke, there's also the question of academic and research fraud, because it was argued as part of the plan that Lake Alexandrina, one of these lower lakes near the mouth of the Murray, was a freshwater lake and needed the flushing of water out of the Murray to sustain its environmental integrity. And now Professor Peter Gell has highlighted that for thousands of years it's in fact been a seawater lake, that it relies on the ocean, not the flushing of fresh water coming down from the Murray. So what you've got there, because of that research fraud at Lake Alexandrina, is effectively a cross-subsidisation, that farmers and water users in New South Wales have lost the water that's gone down to the Murray, the fresh water they said was needed at Lake Alexandrina, the Coorong and the other lower lakes, and it turns out the water, its only effective use down there has been to sustain water sports and boating on the lake for the middle and upper class of Adelaide. So talk about a state that has milked and worked the system to its advantage. You've got the problem of the politics of this basin plan, the waste at the Barmah Choke, and the cross-subsidisation of water out of New South Wales to Adelaide for their boating and water sports recreation. Well, you know, Adelaide must be giggling to themselves that they've got this extraordinary deal all at the expense of New South Wales. Now, this is not sustainable. It should be knocked over. We should be supporting the leader of the National Party, who does from time to time talk a big game, but in this case he's talking something that's vitally important to people in New South Wales. Now, I don't exactly know how it works in the government, but I read these comments, rip the bloody thing up, get out of the basin plan. I think, well, finally there's common sense inside the government. And then I look for the legislation and the government taking action. I can only assume there's not enough support inside the government for Barilaro and his approach for common sense. So it's incumbent upon this parliament, I think, for the leader of the Liberal Party, the leadership of the Labor Party, maybe some of the crossbenchers to look at this and say, well, we're supporting the Deputy Premier. He's 100% right. This is a rip-off of the interests of New South Wales. This basin plan was never sustainable for the environment or for economic interests. And when you've got so many problems multiplying, it's essential for the parliament to have this debate, to back the Deputy Premier, to back the leader of the National Party and ensure that New South Wales is sending more good news to country New South Wales in these desperate circumstances. And, Mr President, we know there's another problem with the nature of the plan, and the federal government effectively fessed up to it earlier in the week, because they announced an extraordinary deal by which they're now going to pay Adelaide to turn on its desalination plant to produce drinking water there that was otherwise coming out of the basin plan and make some of that water available belatedly in New South Wales. So how does this work? For years and years we've been flushing water unnecessarily into the mouth of the Murray. It's gone out into the ocean. It's all full of salt. Now it's got to come back into the desal plant, take the salt out, and that's the drinking water for Adelaide. Well, it should never have happened this way. It should never have been a roundabout arrangement whereby they're now funding Adelaide to do the things Adelaide should have been doing in the first place. Turn on its own desal plant to provide the drinking water they say they need and make the water available for farmers, irrigators and economies in country New South Wales. So this ridiculous federal government announcement just highlights how the plan has been wrong for a good 7 years, how the federal government now knows it's unmanageable. I would call upon the federal minister to seriously investigate what happened about Lake Alexandrina, the false argument that it was fresh water, when all these thousands of years it's been salt water, and New South Wales didn't need to have the basin plan in place. Now, the Deputy Premier has asked the Water Minister to seek some advice on how we get out of the failed Murray Darling Basin plan. Well, I sought some advice and it's pretty simple. In fact, the 2019 South Australian Murray Darling Basin Royal Commission report, the South Australians themselves, explored the legal and practical consequences of withdrawal from the basin plan. It identified three simple actions that New South Wales could take quickly through the parliament to get this done. One, announce your withdrawal from the basin plan. Barilaro has effectively done that, ripped the thing up. Two, withdraw from the intergovernmental agreements governing the basin management, so that's a straightforward process, and then repeal through legislation, referral legislation that referred state powers to the Commonwealth. We foolishly, back in the day, sent state powers to the Commonwealth. That needs to be repealed, and New South Wales can start to manage more of its own water, keep more of its own water resource for the benefit of our economy, and deal with the multiple problems that have made this basin plan completely unsustainable, ineffective and unfair on our state. Now, if we're not, as a parliament, going to stand up for New South Wales first and foremost, if we're not going to back the Deputy Premier and the Leader of the National Party, it's a funny old day for country New South Wales. The government's on a roll. They've done right to Farm Bill and done the right thing. Back the Premier. We should have a full debate here where leaders of various parties declare their support. because I sense inside the government the Deputy Premier needs it. He should get it from this chamber as part of a matter of public importance, comprehensive debate, and I recommend that to the House.